Deadly Desire, Day 5. Thanks so much for joining us for our special Fox 5 coverage of the Brendan Banfield murder trial happening right now in Northern Virginia. I'm producer Chris, alongside Fox 5 writer and producer Vernon Miles. Thank you so much for staying with us. Day 1 of week 2 of testimony underway today. This is the case against the man accused of killing his wife and another man amid an affair with an au pair. Vernon, another dramatic day in court. It has been a dramatic case so far. 2 big headlines today, though. Prosecutors rested and the defense asked for a dismissal of all charges. Walk us through a little bit of what happened.
That's right. It started off kind of slow. We were talking earlier about this, that, it seems like they're really getting into the weed on the evidence. But I think by the end of the day, it really picked up. You had the defense really putting out there that, like, all right, and this is, I think, the first time we really got to look at what the defense's arguments are going to be towards the end of this case. They were saying, other than Giuliano's testimony, which we don't think is reliable, there's no forensic evidence backing up what the prosecution is saying here. We also had Bob in the courtroom there the whole time covering all of this. Bob, what was your takeaway from today?
Well, same thing, Vernon. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Bob, how are you?
Good to see you. All right, thanks. Just as you pointed out, Vernon, it was kind of going slow all day. They had a lady who was, I guess, been in the business for a long time, worked out in Oklahoma City initially. She's what they call a blood spatter, not splatter with an L, but no L, blood spatter pattern expert, an analyst, who was going through, for the prosecution, the blood evidence that was found at the murder scene and on the murder weapons. But at no point did she really get to, and did the prosecutor, Jenna Sands, in pushing her, get to any kind of evidence that pointed the finger at Brendan as having used the knife to stab his wife, Christine, to death. And so it was tedious. We're going to hear a little bit of that testimony in a little bit. But at the end of the day, the prosecution called on their final witness, who was Christine Banfield's father. And he's been sitting just 2 rows in front of me throughout the trial. We knew there was family in the courtroom. We didn't know who was who, but we could kind of figure it out. And I thought for sure that he was Christine's father. And in the afternoon break, as we left the courtroom, I kind of stood in the hallway for a minute. And it's funny, I've seen him. He's kind of not made eyes with anybody, really. But as he was leaving the courtroom, before going back after the break to actually take the witness stand, he kind of looked over at me and winked. And I smiled and didn't think anything of it. And the prosecution calls him onto the witness stand. And it was a brief little episode of him, kind of saying, yes, Christine's dad. She got married in 2010. They had a daughter in 2018. Growing up, she had some kind of episodes where she bled and bruised easily, but kind of drew no conclusion from that. And that was basically it. And then John Carroll, who is Brendan Banfield's attorney, got up because the state had rested, and the judge said, look, we'll come back tomorrow. This was late in the day. We'll come back tomorrow to start the defense. And John Carroll said, wait a minute, I've got something to say, and here it is.
What we have up to this point in terms of evidence, Judge, we haven't heard a single word from a single detective that was involved in the homicide division. We haven't heard any sort of credible evidence relating to what was espoused as a theory of catfishing for years now, and had been working toward that. And in fact, you have the only person that has even suggested anything, and this is probably the 3rd or 4th time that story has changed, is Juliana Perez Magalhaes. She's now testifying to what appears to be intended to fit right into whatever the Commonwealth's theory was regarding that, but doesn't even make it that far. She can't answer any questions with any sort of detail. In fact, without the absolute direct and oftentimes leading questions related to the Commonwealth, she wasn't able to answer a single thing. We went through in painstaking detail the numerous messages that at one point she might have said something about, but now she doesn't remember. In fact, I'm not sure her testimony is worthy of consideration.
And as far as the co-defendant's testimony, I cannot find, as a matter of law, that her testimony was incredible. The weight of the evidence is up to the fact finder, so I'll deny your motions at this time.
As Karate denying the motion put forward by John Carroll on behalf of Brendan Banfield to dismiss all the charges. He basically said, I moved to dismiss the charges. The Commonwealth hasn't proven their case. And you could hear the judge there say, no, forget that. We're back at 10 a.m. tomorrow. The defense will begin its case at that point, guys.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because, again, we've talked throughout this case that we're not really sure what the defense is going for here. And I think here we're starting to see that get put together right before the defense is going to be leading in with their witnesses tomorrow. We're hearing the defense saying, look, this has not been reliable testimony. We can't get a straight answer out of Juliana, who is the key witness for the prosecution. So I think that's kind of been a big takeaway from today and a look at what's ahead for the trial.
Yeah, and guys, like in some of the pretrial hearings and motions dating back several months, what's kind of come to light is that within the Fairfax County Police Department, there were some detectives, and that part of what John Carroll said there, we didn't hear it, but he said, look, the state never put on the stand, introduced at trial, one homicide detective on this case, because there had been some transfers within the major crimes unit of Fairfax County Police. The lead detective on the case initially is no longer like in that role and kind of was taken off the case. So I get the sense, and if you look at the defense list of potential witnesses, it's lengthy, and there are a lot of police officers and detectives on that list. Not that they're going to call them all, because the prosecution didn't call maybe half of the people on their witness list, but there is a chance, and we don't know for sure, that John Carroll is going to put on the stand some of the initial Fairfax County Police homicide detectives who had different theories as to what happened before they have finally, almost 3 years later, have come up with this prosecution theory that it was the lovers, and nobody disputes that, not even Brendan Banfield and his attorney, the lovers, Juliana Magalhaes and Brendan Banfield, conspiring, catfishing to bring this Joseph Ryan into the house to kill Christine and Joseph Ryan. In fact, in answering John Carroll's motion to dismiss, the prosecutor, Jenna Sands, got up and said, look, we have proven that Brendan Banfield shot and killed Joe Ryan and stabbed his wife to death, even though some of the evidence that we've kind of seen over the last few days, last week and today, didn't really kind of point the finger directly at Brendan for holding the knife and stabbing his wife to death.
Hey, Bob, let me ask you a question. And I know neither of us are legal experts, but you've obviously been in court for all of this trial so far. Ending with the blood spatter expert, we talked a little bit about how it was a little technical, it was a little boring. In your opinion, was this sort of an anticlimactic end to the prosecution's case, and maybe that's why they then called her father to the stand? Because you said that he didn't necessarily add much testimony to the case.
He didn't. I kind of thought they were going to this whole notion of maybe since the dad knew that she bruised and bled easily as a child and growing up, that, you know, and during childbirth for their daughter back in March of 2018, that maybe they were about to introduce something that would go along with her being stabbed and it being a bloody scene or something to that effect. But no, there was really nothing that the dad said that I think added to their case at all. And you know, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I was waiting for something definitively that would tie Brendan to the stabbing death of Christine, and it wasn't there. And at one point, I mentioned this to Vernon and Guy earlier today at the lunch break. At one point earlier today, I was sitting in front of someone who had been involved in this case from the very beginning, who is not now, not a journalist, but kind of in the law enforcement world. And there were times during the prosecution's questioning of the blood spatter expert where he was kind of just like, I could hear it. I don't know if other people could hear it, but he was kind of like, oh, man. Like he was not happy with what the prosecution was doing to try to nail down whatever evidence they thought they had or had to point the stabbing death of Christine like directly, squarely on Brendan's lap. And my layperson sense is that they didn't do that. And it'll be interesting to see what the defense says, because their whole story is that this was an intruder and that Joe Ryan stabbed Christine to death, and Brendan, admits shooting Juliana shot a second time, but shooting and killing Joe Ryan kind of in self-defense. So we'll see if the defense can kind of, convince the jury of that story, because I'm not 100% sure, besides the au pair's testimony, that they've been convinced that Brendan Banfield stabbed his wife to death.
Even that blood spatter analyst that we were talking about earlier, when they had her on the stand, I know the prosecution was trying to get her to say, well, we saw that Brendan had blood on his hands quite literally at the scene, but she was saying, there was not very clear reasoning behind why, especially because he probably had his hands on his wife's neck, which could have been just to staunch the flow of blood. Let's hear what she had to say about that.
He did have blood on his hands.
And in fact, I know you're not happy with the quality of this picture, but in other pictures that you've seen his hands with blood on the front side and blood on the back side, correct?
Yes, both hands were blood covered.
Okay. And that would be consistent with someone who's rendering aid before first responders come, isn't that right?
It's consistent with him having blood on his hands.
Okay.
He did, looking at the first officer entering the room, he did have his hands on her neck.
Right. So we saw from her that, there could be multiple reasons for why he had the blood on his hands. We also heard earlier on that, when he was immediately in the aftermath here, he asked to wash his hands, and I believe one of the police officers said, we didn't have a reason to stop him. So, yeah, he went to wash his hands. It's interesting looking back at that, at some of the evidence that may have been lost during that process.
Yeah. All right, Bob. So tomorrow, the defense set to take the stand. What can we expect? You mentioned a lengthy witness list. Is there still a question whether or not Brendan will take the stand in his own defense too?
Yes, but I can't believe that would happen. Just, again, my layperson's perspective, because, again, their theory is that, at least in terms of how the trial is going, that the Commonwealth hasn't proven its case. So I don't think they would need him up there to kind of beg for his life and try to tell a different story, because as far as they're concerned, at least publicly, the Commonwealth didn't present their case. And they have a lengthy list, like a number of police officers, Brendan's mother, Teresa Tess, who helped pay for Juliana, the au pair's legal fees from the time she was arrested until she took the guilty plea to manslaughter when she was facing murder charges. So Brendan Banfield's mother's on the list. She, by any chance, testify? A lot of names that we don't know, but there were names on the prosecution list, like someone from FetLife, the fetish website that was supposedly used, according to prosecutors and Juliana herself, that she and Brendan used under Christine's name and profile to bring this Joseph Ryan into the house to have some kind of sex rape fantasy with Christine, which then they would interrupt, and that whole story. That person was not called. So there's a lengthy defense witness list. We don't know who all is going to be testifying, who starts first, what all they're going to do. As you heard John Carroll in that clip there, he was hoping that the judge would say, case dismissed. That didn't happen.
Yeah, one thing from that opening clip that he mentioned is the whole catfishing idea that he, I think, alluded to there as being concocted. I'm very curious to see how that plays out, what they use for the defense for that. Are they saying it either didn't happen? I mean, surely there's digital footprints here showing that in some case. So I'll be interested to see if they're going to say that Christine was a part of that or if it was entirely made up afterwards. I think that part will be really interesting. Bob, you had talked about, not needing to put him on the stand, Brendan, that is, because, the prosecution hasn't really laid out the case that this is something that definitively happened. One of the other interesting moments from court today that we thought was the murder weapon itself, the knife that's in question. The blood spatter analyst here, adding to what we already heard from police earlier in the trial, that a lot of the evidence there is unusable because it's not clear, when the blood came into contact with the knife, whose fingerprints were where. Let's hear what she had to say about that.
In the body cam video, there were multiple places that showed where the knife was altered, if you will, by officers in the scene. That is, officers coming in, walking in the area where the knife was. You see the knife in one orientation, then another orientation. It gets flipped over, it gets pressed down. So based on that, anything that's on the knife could have been transferred from the floor to the knife, There's also bedding, fabric that's on the floor, part of which has saturations to it. So that could have transferred from that to the knife. So there were so many alterations that could be seen in the body cam that would confuse anything that we get from the knife. So we don't know if, say, the bloodstains on the knife were there before officers arrived, or if it happened as a consequence of the knife being moved as the officers are coming in and with their footwear, hitting it, pushing it, stepping on it, and so forth.
So, Vernon, that murder weapon, that knife, was not tested for DNA then because of what she just explained, correct?
Right. And Bob, I think you were going to say something about the evidence presented.
I was just going to say
right.
her name is Iris Dolly Graff, just for posterity purposes. That's who she was. A blood spatter expert, has a company with her husband, had been out in Oklahoma City. She was contracted basically by the police department and the Commonwealth's attorney to kind of lay out the evidence. And it was interesting when she said, yeah, like, and as a layperson, you didn't test the knife for DNA. When that was her explanation why they didn't.
Yeah, like you were saying, Chris, there's a lot of uncertainty there. They couldn't get a lot of clear information. We heard that from a fingerprint analyst last week, that the prints, it was inconclusive who they belonged to, right after the murder. And again, this being a weapon that may have been around in the house, some of that could have been around before. That's part of any kind of challenge when you come to convicting based on like a domestic dispute.
Yeah, and I think as the prosecution rests, again, the person sitting behind me who was, fairly well involved in this thing, and just a lot of others, reporters talking with each other. And I've been sitting with Tom Jackman, a retired Washington Post reporter, through much of it, kind of looking at each other like, they didn't nail it down. They've got the au pair to tell this sensational story. But in terms of the blood evidence, not once did any of the forensic specialists that, including today, that the Commonwealth's attorney put on the witness stand, did they say Brendan Banfield's blood was, even though he had bloody hands from trying to save his wife's life, according to the defense, nothing definitive to say, he was caught literally red-handed.
Yeah, I really do think this goes to show that a lot of this case is going to reside on whether or not the jury believes Juliana. Chris, what are you feeling about all this?
I know for a fact that we have the excellent team coverage that Vernon back here at the station is providing, and Bob in the courtroom. Defense testimony continues tomorrow at 10 a.m., correct, Bob? You'll be back out in court for that?
That's right. 10 a.m. start. And this judge, Penny Oscarati, man, she is like, the clock on her, the bench hits 10, she's walking in the door. She doesn't mess around.
All right, sounds great. All right, you can keep up with our coverage right here on Fox Local, on Fox 5 DC's YouTube page, and Fox 5's TikTok account. Vernon, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with highlights from the day one of defense testimony.